The Knowing Show. I am your host, Christine Marie, and y'all, we are diving into a topic where we're kind of pulling back the screen, so to say. We're looking a little bit behind, where we're looking at the Wizard of Oz, and we're looking at how a founder executive of 30 plus years in sales, but also the general manager, vice president, co-founder of Gap Wireless, Glenn Poulos. Thank you so much for joining us today. How he is engaging with loss and doing the next right thing, even in a time where it's really, really painful. And so we don't get this peek behind the curtain often. So Glenn, I'm so grateful for your willingness to join us. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Thank you, Christine. It's great to be here.
It's so good to have you, Glenn. I really appreciate, I asked you, I like asking guests before we join the show, what's kind of top of mind? What are you thinking about right now? And I actually asked you a question I don't normally ask people. So it was interesting that I did. And then your response that followed was, I think that this is exactly the topic we should be talking about. I asked you, what's lighting you up right now? And to be more specific, it's what's bringing you joy, what's life-giving. And that's when you shared that there's actually, this is a heavy time because a few weeks ago, and I'll let you share, but a few weeks ago was really devastating.
Yeah, so I had two French bulldogs. One, his name is Pierre, and the other was named Jean-Jacques. And Jean-Jacques passed away very suddenly about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was just really, really tough. And yeah, so that's what I'm dealing with right now. And in the midst of it, we got a new puppy, which is good, but there's still this huge hole, from the dog being gone, right? And but with having a lot of other responsibilities, there's not a huge amount. Like most people, there's like everybody can relate when you lose a dog and what have you, but they still expect you to show up every day, right? And I kind of expect that of myself as well. But it's you have this huge hole, right? And I mean, I can't predict what the future will look like. I just sort of know what it looks like now, and it's
right.
It's tough, right? And and he was a very special dog, so yeah.
Well, Glenn, I know you're an author of Never Sit in the Lobby, and it's been an incredibly successful book on effectively creating the best salesmen and women in the world. And I'm sure you kind of expected that we would talk about that. But I wanted to just be relevant to what you're experiencing right now, because to your point, there's not often a lot of space where we can really be genuine and authentic, maybe even vulnerable in conversations, and people who are willing to go to those places, we all learn so much from when they're in the middle of it, in the thick of it. In fact, when I was authoring my book, Knowing, that's going to be coming out in the next probably.
Yay.
But as I was authoring the book, I didn't know what it would turn into when I started writing, but I was like, I need to chronicle my journey in the ashes, because not many people write from that place. They write on the other side of it. So even, this book has been being written for 2 or 3 years. So I tried to really keep the integrity of what I wrote during that time, because it was so raw. And so to that point, I am so grateful for you being here and being willing to share kind of as you're in the rawness of grief. It's interesting. I think that we were never taught how to process grief. We were never taught how to do relationships. And so because we were never taught how to do relationships, I think we actually formed a tighter bond sometimes with these wonderful animals of ours, because they always loved us. We never had any kind of contention with them. We never had conflict. And so to that point, the bond is just so, so, so deep. And then we never were taught how to process the grief of losing them on the other side of that. So can you kind of talk through what you're experiencing right now that's been helpful for you as you've been going through this process?
For sure. Yeah. And one of the things, because you mentioned the book, and then also losing my dog, Jean-Jacques, and there's a chapter in the book, shameless plug for the book, if I could do that. But the chapter is, you only get forever to make another impression, right? And it's trying to teach young people about the importance of not only making a good first impression, but how when you interact with people, and of course I'm talking to business people and salespeople, and so I'm, these are typically customers and stakeholders or what have you. So that's what the book's appealing to, right? But each time you interact with those people, you're making an impression that you need to value the same as a first impression, right? And so, and it requires sort of some discipline that some people that it sort of shocks them. They kind of like want to argue with me and said, no, my mom told me I only need to make a good first impression, right? And I'm like, that is true, right? But what she didn't realize is that when you're building a career, it's built on a litany of first impressions that are built up to become your character in the to the employer, to your boss, to your customers, to your other stakeholders, and what have you. And so the one of the subtitles to the books that's not it's not a published subtitle. It comes after. It's kind of, Never Sit in the Lobby. That's the title. 57 factors to build a career in business and sales. And then the unwritten one is how to get, act, and stay in front of your customers and to be a pleasure to do business with always. Right?
Love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, and and people are like, oh well, again, everyone always wants to argue with you about the logic behind some of your the foundations of what you're putting forth, right? And I'm like, look, I had lots of competitors that were formidable competitors that had as much business or more business. They were proud of their companies and they were doing well, just like we were. But they weren't a pleasure to do business with, and they were proud of it, right? And so when I started building Gap Wireless, which I did sell, and now I'm working on my third company, right? Which we can maybe touch on briefly, but I wanted to build it from the ground up and with the DNA of being a pleasure to do business with, so that even in the face of difficult situations with the customer, right? Like product failures and some kind of unsatisfactory performance and things like that. Right. And that I felt that your sort of the futures that come after those incidents are really built on a foundation of what you do when things don't go well versus when they do go well, right? Obviously, people are really nice to you when you're cutting them a check to buy whatever it is you sell. Absolutely. Right? But when the problems occur, do they answer the phone or do they put you through to customer service, which has, right, an automated attendant, and now it's all, AI bots, are you having trouble with your phone? You say yes and one for, and like right, those very impersonal things, right? And we didn't have any of that stuff in our company. It was all either person to person or direct phone. The phone calls were always answered personally, right? So.
Yeah, it's really, really helpful to hear you say that, Glenn, because I think it's easy to dismiss the person-to-person connection in lieu of, oh, that's the old way of doing things. That's the antiquated way. That's the boomer way. And Glenn, I think that that's so, so important what you're saying, because we're seeing Gen X more often than not putting away their phone and trying to have person-to-person communication. I'm hearing more and more from the next generation who are really frustrated when they have to deal with an AI agent. So we're more desperate for human-to-human connection than ever before. So what your perspective and the way that you're looking at this is so incredibly relevant. In fact, that's the way we're advising businesses. Yes, automate what needs to be automated for the sake of freeing your team for relationship building, for connection. So I just wanted to double click on that. That is so incredibly important. And I'm so grateful that you said that. I wanted to ask you a quick question here to that point. We're talking about, okay, when we're in this season of, man, it is incredibly hard and painful at home, let's say, but we still need to be a pleasure to do business with. How do we keep that through line of being authentic to who we are, yet allow for us to be able to be a pleasure and not kind of bring that into work? Like, how do we stay authentic while also having that compartmentalization?
Yeah. So what I, what I've done, what I tended to do, what I've done in my last business, in my new business, and whatever, is that the first thing I've done is sort of build up a support structure for myself, so that even in situations maybe not as challenging as what I'm dealing with right now, but in other situations where I've got all these fallback positions, right? So, like for instance, I can't answer the phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? So I'm not always going to be the one to answer the phone. But some of the things that I've done was I went through the organization and I figured out what is the maximum amount of authority and power I can give each person that supports me, um, to help make a customer, client, or happy, right, in a situation, right? And and often I found that this works so beautifully because when people are spending someone else's money, they tend to be more, sometimes more prudent with it than their own, right? Like if it's, and so I gave everyone a budget, from people that worked in the warehouse and opened the back doors to the trucks, all the way to the vice presidents of the business. They all had a specific amount of money, and the lowest was $100, and then it was someone had 200, 500, 1,000. And so if I'm unable to respond because of sort of, you know, illness, or right now it's kind of like grief and what have you, although I still, because my new business is kind of small, I still have to show up. So I'm kind of giving you two answers at the same time, but
Right.
I could deflect it, and I could say, and do a soft handoff to someone and say, I really want to help you with that, but I think that Jack in the X department, or Y, or Sally in the
Right.
Y department might be able to help you quicker and better, and I'll check back and make sure that everything was satisfactory. So because I don't want to just say, oh, my dog died and I can't talk to you right now, right?
Yeah.
So
I need
you
to
know,
yeah.
although some customers I might say that,
Well, you
but
know what? It's really human. It's
yeah,
really human. And
yeah,
who knows what could happen as a result of that aspect of connection,
yeah,
where someone's like, mine is on its last leg. I was walking yesterday and I saw a gentleman and his dog was like just barely making it, and I
yeah,
just was looking at this poor man. I was like, I'm sorry in advance. Like, I know you're going to be in hell next week or whenever it happens. So,
absolutely, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and and what they do with that budget that I've given them is that if they feel that the right thing would be solved by doing X, Y, or Z, and it would cost up to their limit, let's say they had bought a few widgets, and they came back and they said, hey, one was missing from the box. There should have been 40, and there was only 39, and the widgets are $46 each, right? Well, their budget's $100. They can just go to the shelf, grab them a widget, and send them on their way, right? And or maybe the shipment, they paid for express shipping next day and we were a day late or something like that, and the shipping amount was $96. So that even someone all the way at the most entry level person with a $100 budget could say, you know what, we're going to credit you back the shipping. And we had this form that was readily available throughout the building,
So
from the
good.
warehouse to the front door, and they would just make a little, and they were rewarded for how many times they filled out those pieces of paper. So in other words, we gave gift cards to them for doing it
Nice.
versus punishing them for, you know what I mean? Because some people go, oh, I don't want to give it away because then I'll be kind of thing, right? And and other times when you're trying to sometimes when you're with clients or things like that, I tend to sort of treat it like a Broadway play, right?
Right.
Where I'm not always the same demeanor when I'm in my office, like filling out paperwork or designing a newsletter or coming up with a program or talking, figuring out something about a vendor. But when I'm with customers, I'm kind of, I'm in a Broadway play, and that's where I like to be. That's where I'm actually, where I sort of gain the most power back from work, right? And I'm not an extroverted person, like I'm introverted by nature, but when it's in the fullness of what happens at work, being with the customer is the most rewarding to me, in a fulfilling kind of a way. And so I kind of use that situation to get out of myself and kind of put some of my problems aside and and perform Little Orphan Annie or whatever plays playing that day on Broadway, right? And
So fun. I love that.
yeah, and
please finish. I didn't mean to cut you off.
yeah, no, and I was just and I mean, it hasn't just, obviously right now I have this sort of, everything's being filtered sort of through this immediate loss, but there's been so many because I started in sales in 85 and now I'm in 2026. So that's actually 40 years, not 30, but which is kind of funny in itself. But there's been a lot of challenges over the years where I'd had to go in to see a client and I'd have to leave everything in the car, and bottle it up. But once I got there, it was usually fine. Then I'd get back to the car and worry about the problem of the day, right? And that's how I handle it. So
I wanted to ask you, though I actually was just sitting with a roofing company on Monday and we were talking about mapping out the customer experience. And it's not just the customer journey. Those are two very different things. It's okay. How are we, how is the customer experiencing our company and our team? It's there sitting in their shoes. And this is where empathy is needed in addition to data. It's not one or the other. It has to be both. So to use empathy, to sit in the seat of the customer and be like, man, how can we really just delight them? To use your phrase, being a pleasure to do business with. And there's so many reasons for this. I mean, this is where having a value system on relationship is of utmost importance. Do you actually value the person on the other side of the computer, on the other side of the phone? And so for most businesses, we think in terms of the customer journey, which is the data-driven points of the customer moving through the pipeline of the purchase, rather than sitting in the seat and receiving the email and receiving the communication, picking up the phone, dialing, who do I hear? Is it an AI agent? Is it a person? How easy is it to get in touch with someone versus, man, I feel like I just cannot get through. That's so frustrating. And then what's the emotion associated with each part of the customer experience? So I wanted to ask you, we initially started out just talking about like, okay, this is just a hard time in life right now. This has been a painful couple of weeks for you. And you've mapped out the customer experience preemptively so that you've got the checks and balances in place if there ever is a time where it's like, I want to thrill and delight people. And honestly, because I'm a human being, it's hard to completely turn that off. Or let's say somebody calls you and is really pissed off and you're already struggling. It's going to maybe cause a problem and activate each other. So with you guys setting up the customer experience and kind of mapping that out so that there's guardrails for, I'm going to hand this off to this person. I'm going to have systems in place where I know exactly what the next right thing is to do. You said that earlier on the next right thing. And I think that that's so potent. And I'd love to hear you talk more about how you all went ahead to establish the customer experience in the first place. And not just the customer experience. This is where it's so exciting. And I love what you're doing because you said you're giving your bonus incentive and reward incentive, not punishment incentive for your team. That's a completely different way of looking at it. So you're not just taking this concept to your customers, you're taking it to your employees. So how did you all start with mapping out both the employee experience and the customer experience?
Okay, so the first thing is leveraging off where you started, which was you brought up empathy, right? And so, and again, I love starting by saying shameless plug for the book, but in the book I go on at great lengths talking about empathy, sympathy, and compassion, right? And so I've always made it a point to teach people, right? And most people interchange them willy-nilly without a lot of consideration to the definitions, right? So the first thing I try to do is teach people the difference between empathy, sympathy, and compassion, right? Where empathy is, and you nailed it, right, is truly getting in the shoes of the customer client or what have you, and feeling what they're feeling, right? Like that's what empathy is, right? Sympathy, on the other hand, is sort of understanding what someone's going through. Empathy is different in that you're feeling it internally, right? Sympathy is you're just cognitively understanding it. And compassion, is wanting to alleviate it, right? And I call those sort of the three pillars of kindness. And so each situation requires you to interpret what's going on sort of in real time and apply the right technique, right? But it always starts with empathy first, like what's important to the customer. And and there's just so many ways you can go about it, right? But when someone's putting in a new roof or whatever, there's lots of reasons people want a new roof, right? And the smart person, sort of wants to figure out in advance what is the real reason why the person wants, like, put yourself in their shoes to figure out why they need a new roof, right? Maybe they were in hurricane oh no or whatever, and they've lost the roof, right? Like, obviously that brings it all of its problems, and lots of room for empathy, sympathy, and compassion. Other people, just the roof's 20 years old and they're not overly thrilled about having you there, but they know they need a new roof, right? Or maybe they want to sell the house and they know that they got to put a new roof on. And so what they really want is, they don't want anything to do with the new roof, and they don't even want the comfort of a new roof. They actually want a new house, and it's not the one they're in, right?
What a good point. Yeah.
And right. Yeah. And then just a third example, just so you can see the differences, that, and other people, might want like a barrel roof or a steel roof because it's cooler and nicer and makes them look more prestigious than their neighbor who has a tile or whatever tiles are made out of. I can't remember again, but like tar or whatever, shingles or something. And
right.
And so they want it for the aesthetics, right? And so if going in, you can then be playing to the feelings of what they would get having gotten their new roof for that particular reason, right? Like, in other words, they might not care that their family's not going to get wet during a bad storm. They just want to look good in the neighborhood, or they're really worried about their safety and in light of future hurricanes and things like that. So, you want to be sort of preemptively understanding what all those things are, and appealing to all that in the way you apply things, right? And then just to take that whole example of the roof, because you were dealing with a roofer, maybe the roof got blown off or something, and the customer phones and they're really mad, right? And so you might need to you might need to apply both empathy and compassion, understand what it's like to have a roof with a hole in it, and then compassion would be to alleviate their suffering, right? But a roof's maybe not the easiest example for me to think of something in real time, but maybe they were negligent or something with the roof,
right?
And it's fine for you to understand that they're stressed out about it, and you want to alleviate their suffering, and you understand and all that, but it's not incumbent upon you to pay for it, right?
Yes. What an interesting point. Yes.
So, but the problem is that most people are too busy sort of thinking of the next thing they need to say vis-a-vis their own position in the matter, when rather having it be focused on the other party, right?
Gosh, that's so good. Well, and even Glenn, to this point of like, man, if we're having a bad day and we have not cultivated the ability of truly listening, then, and we're thinking about what we're gonna say next, we're already in our heads and like, we're kind of in here rather than being able to be engaging out there with them. So this skill set that you're talking about actually is a protection mechanism, so that when we do have a bad day, we're so good at asking questions, we're so trained to focus on them, that naturally protects us from potentially doing something that we would regret otherwise.
And if I may, because you keep giving me these opportunities for shameless plugs for the book, right? One of the chapters adjacent to the 3 pillars on kindness, is the section on active listening, right? And God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you do the math, right, on how much you should be talking versus listening, right? And but when you're trying to figure out, well, how do I not do what I said not to do, like have it be about yourself and be in your own, like, what do I say next or whatever, and you said it yourself, is ask the questions, right? And so I've built up a set of sort of built-in questions that I can ask people so that I don't offer any advice, and I have, because I don't feel that they fully gotten through the situation yet, so it's
Yes.
basically simple phrases like, oh, and really, and oh no, oh my, and oh, how did that make you feel, and what happened next, right? And people say, well, that sounds disingenuous or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, it does when I'm telling it to you as a story, but
Right.
when you do it in real time, try it with a friend and watch how they respond to the conversation, because in the end, most people just want to be heard, right? They don't need your advice. They might specifically say, what should I do? And
Right.
again, they probably only marginally want your advice. They just want what should I do to be the thing that they think they should do, so
Yeah.
that they might, right? But again, I would say, well, if you did that, how would that make you feel, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's keeping it focused on the other party, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah.
Making me think too, there's kind of multi-layered reasons and benefits of asking questions and truly listening. As we were just sharing, it's protecting us if we're having a bad day, like we're already predisposed to be of interest and curious about them. But to that point, it allows for us to really, someone here in the chat commented that this is why we ask questions, is to understand their motivation. So you gave all these great examples of why somebody might want a roof. Is it for aesthetics? Is it to fix, hail damage? Is it because it's just old and it's waned? Do you actually need it because you're trying to sell the house and you're trying to get rid of it? There's so many different reasons. And once we understand, now we can really serve and
Right.
really come into their experience. And man, it comes down to, do we understand their why? Do we know their why? That's so good.
Yeah, exactly.
What are the other, for this whole aspect of doing the next right thing and setting up the process of the customer experience, putting yourself in the shoes? You talked about the 3 pillars of kindness: empathy, sympathy, and compassion. Empathy is really like putting yourself in the seat of somebody else. Compassion is, once you do that, now you take action as a result of it. How did you define sympathy?
Sympathy is like understanding what someone's going through. And so it's different because it's like, oh, I got in a fender bender, like, oh, that sucks. And, and you kind of understand what it's like and whatever, but you didn't like stop and get behind the wheel in your mind and like crash into, do a rear end. Maybe you were, distracted and you're feeling guilty, and like that. True empathy would be to do all those things, right? Sympathy is just sort of understanding where they're at, but there's no compelling need to want to resolve it for them, right? That's where the compassion piece comes in.
Right.
And so oftentimes there's, that's really what's required, is just a simple understanding of, what's required, because that particular part of the conversation, or it doesn't warrant you to go full empathy, because it might be distracting and because it's not relevant, right? And and it would distract from the greater part of the conversation that you're having with a customer, right? I can't think of an exact example, but it's sort of like, I got a flat on the way to our meeting, right? Well, that's where you would sort of, practice some sympathy and what have you. And you could probably quickly imagine it anyways, but you don't need to dwell on it, right? And it's not going to change the outcome of the conversation. But if they, if you're selling them new, if you were there to sell them new furniture, but that portion of their building had some fire damage or something, it totally changes the perspective, right? And now you want to think, what would it be like if I had damage to my building because of weather or fire or something like that? And anyways, I don't have all these immediate examples thought up, but just to give people a quick context of how you apply them differently, right? And then they all go together with the listening and whatever in the building of true rapport, right? And what I call is genuine rapport. And again, shameless plug, there's a chapter in the book, called familiarity. Implied familiarity also breeds contempt, right? And there's
Say
a
that one more
saying,
time.
So the saying in the book is called implied familiarity also breeds contempt. And so what that means is that some people have never heard that saying before, but there's a saying called familiarity breeds contempt, right? And it's often used kind of in a bit of a humorous way, right? In the sense that, you know, four friends get together and they decide they're going to drive, you know, from, you know, let's say New York to California, right, in a car, and they absolutely love each other, right? But now they're like in this small little four-seater car for 6 days, right? And their elbows are touching each other, and they're, you know, and so they become hyper familiarized with each other, right? The sounds and the smells and the, you know, the behaviors and the idiosyncrasies and things like that. And it becomes, you become hyper familiar, over familiarized with them in something that you wouldn't normally be exposed to, right? And you kind of get these feelings of contempt, right? It's like, you know, I never want to hear that person snore again, kind of thing, right? Or whatever, right? Kind of thing. But what I learned the hard way was that when you try to imply that you're familiar with someone, and again, I'm usually talking about a customer, right? I mean, it's really offensive. And so the example that I give was the mistake that I made where I looked over a person's shoulder and I saw a photo on their credenza kind of thing behind them in their office. And it was two men. One of them was him holding a fish, you know, kind of like the trophy fish kind of pose that you would think, right? And I had, this was a long time ago, but I had just gotten this boat and I went into this full regalia of like, oh, you're a fisherman. We should go fishing. And I got a new boat up in Silver Lake and blah, 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 and this and that. And he goes, like, what are you talking about? Right. And I'm I saw a porn over his shoulder and I go, well, you know, the photo behind you, right? And he looks, he goes, oh my God, this is really wild. He goes, oh my God. He goes, he grabs the photo and he throws it in the garbage, right? And he goes, that's my ex-father. And like, oh, he goes, I hate that guy. And
Glenn, this is such a good example.
He says, the only thing I hate more than fishing, you know, well, I won't even say it, but, you know, like he's got divorced from the guy's daughter, right? So didn't like the guy. No. And he also didn't like fishing, hated it. And so what ended up happening was, so imagine practicing empathy, right? Put yourself in the shoes of what I created in that guy. Like I brought him to a place in his life where he had a horrible divorce from a woman that he was, you know, that he didn't get along with, and a father-in-law that he didn't like, who was forced to do sports that he hated. Right. Yeah. And do you think that that's conducive to me making a big sale? No.
Yeah. No.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what you would do on the other hand is you would say, oh, that photo's interesting. What's the story behind it?
Kind of protect yourself. Well, and it's the question, to your point of really leading with questions. Yeah. And yeah, that's such a good reframe. And to be honest, Glenn, it's so good for me because I will do the exact opposite of that. I will get so excited because I'm in my experience.
Yeah.
I'm in my experience of how much, to use your example, I love fishing. I'm thinking about all my pleasant memories and I'm not in empathy, you know? So I really, really appreciate that. And so I actually, to this point, I want to talk about, you know, we were talking earlier, and for those of you who are just joining, welcome. We're talking about this balance of how to do the next right thing during a time of loss. And one of the biggest things that has been clear is that Glenn has effectively created, and specifically as at work, right? We're talking about how to do the next right thing at work during this kind of personal season of loss. And what Glenn has really helped us see is that when we create a customer experience and customer journey, so we design it for the way that our team is going to interact for the sake of how the customer will receive it on an emotional level and really build that layer of trust throughout. So it's like the next right thing in each incremental step. If that's clear, then whether it's us doing it or we call in reserves because we're struggling, we're able to hand it off, and our customer their experience isn't disrupted, even though the journey on our end, who does what, might change. And so to that point, Glenn, what you're sharing here, it's how do we have empathy sit in their experience, ask questions to ensure that each touch point of their experience is one that is upheld by those 3 pillars of kindness: empathy, sympathy, and compassion. For us then on our end, when we do need to kind of have that, and actually I'm going to reframe this question. So one of the things that I talk about a lot that I really want your perspective on is, apart from authenticity, empathy becomes manipulation. I've seen that happen where people are showing quote unquote empathy, but it ends up being manipulative because they're not being authentic, they're not being genuine. And so how do we lead with those questions, show empathy, sit in their experience without losing ourselves in the process?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of situations where, so you're basically saying that the empathy is not authentic, right? That's the example? And you're saying how not to be that? I just want to frame the question so I answer it the right way, or I might start rambling off in the wrong direction.
I'll consolidate it. How do we protect from empathy turning into manipulation? And how do we maintain authenticity throughout that? Because I have, and I'll actually frame it better. How do we maintain authenticity while asking questions and being empathetic?
Right. So the delivery really matters, right? So you have to, you have to be very cognizant of how your words are going to be landing on the other person. You want to be direct and respectful, but again, in order for it to come off as inauthentic, you're probably failing at the delivery of empathy. In other words, because that's where you're not asking enough questions and you're trying to get hyper involved in sort of the situation, right? And you have to balance. You have to balance the way your approach, right? And so again, it really boils down to, in order to put yourself in someone's shoes, you have to be asking them questions about how they're feeling and what's the impact, rather than, because if not, it's sort of you're saying, oh, that must be really bad or sad, or saying things like that. That's the inauthentic part, right? Where you're offering these comments back, right? And so sometimes you have to tell the people the truth, right? But I say the truth has to be honesty combined with kindness, right? And so, and people are like, what are you talking about? And you have to be honest, you have to tell the truth or whatever. And I said, well, if you have to tell the truth and you can't be honest and kind at the same time, then you shouldn't say anything, right? And so, in other words, I have not a very nice example, but sort of you're fat, right? That's not a very nice way, now that person might be genuinely overweight and might have a serious problem and might need help and whatever. It may not be within your purview to be discussing it with them. Right. But if someone says, say that person says, am I fat? And you might have to respond. You might be in a situation where you need to respond, but again, you want to combine honesty with kindness in the way you deliver it, and that becomes the truth, right? Whereas some people just say, well, I'm just going to cut to the chase and say, yep, you're fat, you're way too fat, right? Whereas you're saying there's ways you can deal with it. Maybe you're a little overweight, maybe you're not comfortable with your weight, that kind of a thing. And you're sort of, at least this is the way I do it, right? Other people don't mind being brutally honest, but I don't call that, again, I don't call honesty, I don't believe in brutal honesty, because you can't be brutally honest and kind at the same time, typically, right? But I'm sorry, I kind of got off track, your question about inauthentic empathy. But again, usually it's because you're talking too much and not listening enough. And again, not being focused on what's going on with them, right? And so the more they're talking, the more they will feel understood and heard. And they're not going to translate that into empathy. They're going to translate that into a meaningful conversation, right? It's like, oh no, that person's really empathetic. Like that's not what they're going to say, right?
Yeah.
It's the result you get, not the definition of your behavior, kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Say, oh, had a really good conversation with that guy or that gal or whatever from so and so or such and such, and we were going through a hard time or this or that, and they really understood where we were at, right? And but a lot of times, you're in business, you're here to you make money, sell things, provide things, do services, whatever it is you're trying to do, right? But the mistakes of most people is they go in with their 5 features and benefits and they figure that they got to regale the customer with all of them at all times. Whereas the whole real magic happens long before you ever got there, in truly understanding what motivates the customer, client, or company or whatever, right? And like, how do they make their money? What do they do for a service? Like,
right.
How do they get their paychecks? Which comes from the money that comes in the back door, because oftentimes you put, as my father used to say, the emphasis on the wrong syllable, right? And just a very quick example to explain what I'm saying is like, most people, when you ask them about Xerox, right, which is getting kind of a dated example, but what does Xerox do? People say they make photocopiers, right? And and even Xeroxing used to be what you used to say about make me a Xerox or whatever, right? Like make me a photocopy. And I'm like, no, that's not their business, right? That's just a byproduct. They're a bank, right? They make their money leasing you photocopiers, not selling.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah. All financing. And so when you're selling a service or a software solution or some other kind of thing to Xerox as a corporation, you're going to go in and sell them the wrong thing because you're not looking at them the right way, right? And so again, this is where it's all like, you're not truly understanding me. You're presenting features and benefits that I don't care about. And again, the roof was a perfect example, right? I just want the cheapest roof that's presentable, because I'm not going to get my money back selling the house. It needs to have at least a 10-year warranty, but I'm not going to give them a 40-year warranty roof that costs 4 times the price, because why would I do that when I'm selling the price and someone else is going to enjoy the benefit? But if I give them a perfectly valid industry competitive roof with a 10-year warranty that's brand new, everyone will be happy, and it costs $5,000 instead of $40,000.
Right.
And it looks nice and whatever. And I can say, yep, the roof was replaced 6 months ago. It's brand new, has 10-year warranty. Everyone's like, okay, check. Right.
I love that. Yeah, I love it. DJ in the chat says you have to read the room and sell the product to each individual, so you find the hook for each possible customer. I love that.
Did you say DJ? Is that the person's name?
Yes. Well,
yeah. Did you know that I'm also a charity DJ? So I just got back from a charity event, a 3-day event.
You're like literally, you're the DJ. You're behind the thing.
Yeah, 1,200 people.
Wow, that's so cool, Glenn.
Yeah, but the emphasis is on the word charity, and so I got a lot of gigs because of I only charge for the rental and the transportation, the insurance, and things like that, and I don't donate my time and stuff.
Yeah.
And but the good thing is you can get some very nice big gigs for like large associations and annual conventions and things, because they're very cost conscious, and they don't need Tiesto performing, and but you get the benefit. I get the benefit of being able to use all my gear and go in front of large audiences.
Wonderful.
And so sorry, the fellas or person, man or woman, I'm not sure, but whose name is DJ, that just resonated with me there when you said that. So.
I love it. Well, he's a friend of the show, so we love him.
Oh, good.
Glenn, I'm so grateful for your time. I know your book, there's 57 rules of sales. Is that correct?
Yeah, the title is Never Sit in the Lobby. And that's one of the main rules up front, right? Is don't sit down when you get to the customer. And the subtitle is 57 Factors to Build a Career in Business and Sales. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, there's such an understanding of of the human being that's necessary for that to be done. And to that point, it extends into us being able to do that work for ourselves. You know,
Yeah.
we're so much better and equipped to serve if we have looked in the mirror and done a lot of that kind of understanding our own motivations, and then to be able to help understand our customers. So thank you for the book. Where can people learn more about you?
Well, they can go to my website, glennpoulos.com, or if they want to exchange ideas or stuff, I'm a top voice on LinkedIn. I'm there every day, and happy to communicate and connect with anyone on LinkedIn. And yeah, and happy to talk about whatever people want to talk about. So exchange ideas, and so
Wonderful.
easy to get a hold of. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Glenn. So grateful for you.
Thank you.
Bill, thank you so much for joining us. We will be live again at 6 p.m. Eastern for trivia. So come hang out with us. We will see you soon. And in the meantime, go follow Glenn. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate you.